everyone, I'm back again to do a video today on how I colour with alcohol markers. Now before I get started, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who has watched my videos so far, and the lovely comments and people subscribing has just been so nice, so I'd like to thank you all for your really warm support. It is very much appreciated. So before I get started, I'll just explain which markers I'm using. I have the Ohuhu alcohol marker set, which is 200 colours. I find sometimes that when I buy the larger sets of things, that I get a little bit overwhelmed by how many colours there are, and then I feel like some of the shades really aren't all that different. So I started out with the 200 set with these. I do really like them. I do like the way they work. I've had several cheaper sets of alcohol markers in the past, and they have yellowed, so I'll just show you an example of that in this book here. So what happens with some of the cheaper ones is that the yellows and the browns particularly, and the reds, anything that has a strong yellow base, will yellow on other pages, and front and back, and sometimes it can even go through onto another page depending on how thick or thin the paper is. So one of the ways I have got around that is this is one of those plastic sleeve document protectors, or you know, they have the white bit of plastic up the side here with holes on so that you can put things into a ring binder. And what I do is I cut that white plastic section off, and depending on the size of the book, I'll trim down the top of that bit as well. And then what I do is just slip that into there. And these ones don't quite fit the whole size of the book, but they're close enough as long as the bits that we're doing the yellowing are covered up. And that's how I stop that from happening again. Or I will put just pieces of paper or baking, you know, sheets of baking paper or tracing paper, just anything in there that's going to help protect these pages from that yellowing. So far I have not found the Ohuhu alcohol markers do that, so that's one bonus of these pens, and they're reasonably priced compared to some. If you haven't seen the Ohuhu markers before, the set that I have has a chisel nib down one end and the fine nib at the other. I do like to work with a brush tip, but I'm a little bit constrained with how much I like to spend on my supplies. So, you know, if it comes down to a broad chisel tip end or a brush end, and there's a big difference in the price at the time I'm buying them, I'll just go for whatever is cheaper. Most of the time I tend to use the fine end anyway. So what I've done to get started, and I must apologise, I do still have the frog, which is rather amusing given that I'm colouring Mr. Fogarty again. So what I thought I would do is I'll show you to start with in a Amazon printed book. Now this is an Australian Amazon printed book, and the paper is slightly better than the American Amazon printed books that I have had in the past. They have been extremely thin, and they almost are absorbent and bleed quite a bit. The Australian Amazon printed paper doesn't seem to do that so much. It's a little bit thicker. It's still going to go through. You can see that one on that page there perhaps. But it seems to have more of a smoother finish and doesn't absorb the ink so quickly, and it doesn't feather or bleed quite so much as what I have seen the American Amazon printed books do. So I'll just give you that little heads up before I start. And I've chosen a few markers here from the warm grey range because I find that these are quite a useful neutral colour to start with, and I'm going to show you how I start doing the stone areas. And I'll start with warm grey 160. Now I don't want you to get too hung up on what colours I'm using or what colour names I'm using, but just more the concept of how I'm using it, because whatever set you have, you're going to have different colours or different names, and it's really about the process of working that I want you to get familiar with or get more comfortable with. So I'm going to start with, it's not the lightest colour, it's sort of more mid-range in colour. And what I like to do is I'll start with that sort of mid-range, and you can use a few different ways or methods to colour with alcohol markers. The big takeout with them is that you need to work fairly quickly, because the edge where you start will start to dry, and if you're working into a dry edge, you're going to get a hard edge or an obvious line or streak. If you keep moving and working into an area that is wet, you don't get those streaks or lines, and you get a much more solid and smooth result out of it. And you can achieve that by either working in straight strokes, or you can do little circular motions, little back and forward motions. There's lots of different ways you can work. There's not just one way that works. Now I'm not going to cap that properly because I'm going to come back to that, but I am holding it in my hand with the cap over it. Now this is a slightly darker warm grey, and now there would be a shadow under that little section there. And so now I will use the slightly lighter colour to come back and feather that out again. Now if I get to a point where I want to end and I don't want a hard obvious end, you can just blend that back in with some dots like so. And just keep going until you feel like that you've got a result there that you want. Now alcohol markers do dry lighter, so once that's dry it's not going to be as obvious again, and you can keep coming back and you can keep layering your colours and get a depth of colour just with the one marker by going over and over it. I prefer to work this way, and that is to get the slightly darker colour back into there like that, and then the lighter colour, and keep building it up that way. So I've got to that point now. If I wanted it darker again, now I have a slightly darker warm grey again. So I would go in with that one and then go back to the medium grey. I'm going to get into a bit of a mess here. And then the lighter grey. And now all I'm doing is barely touching the paper, just lightly feathering the tip of the marker onto the dry areas. You don't have to be pressing hard, just a very slightest touch, and you'll get that little bit of colour without the harsh line at the end of it. Now this is stone, or perhaps made out of concrete or cement or something, and a little bit of texture is not going to matter too much, and in fact I want to sort of exploit that look a little bit more. So on this side I'll start again with the lightest version of warm grey that I've got in my hand here. And you see I'm just doing that back and forward motion, but I'm working quickly and I'm continuously blending it. And I'm not going right up to the line, I'm just stopping just short of the line, and it will continue to bleed over. What happens with alcohol markers is that the longer you leave the nib touching the page, the more bleed you're going to get. So if you don't like to work that way, you can do little quick feathering motions and you're going to get a good result without bleeding too much there. Now that was my medium warm grey. This is my dark there. And now I'm coming back to my lighter version and I'm going to blend that back out again. And I'm using the feathering motion this time. But when I get down here, I want to start doing some texture. And I'm going to dot over that first bit that I coloured that has started to dry. Okay, now I'm going to take the medium version and I'm going to dot that down. Back to the lighter one. I'm going over the top of that and it's helping it all to blend together. And now I'm going to do the darker one up here. So what I'll do now is I'll show you something else that you can do. You can get your colourless blender. Most of these bigger sets come with a colourless blender, or you can buy them separately. This one is a Montmart, I'm not sure if that is how you pronounce that, but Montmart do a dual tip colourless blender that you can buy on its own. And I think the one that I've got with the set here is starting to dry out a little bit, so we'll see if I do get any reaction out of it. And you can just use your colourless blender to do, yeah, it's getting really, really dry. Let's try with this one. So the colourless blender when it's wet will just look really strange, but once it dries, I'll lift this up to the camera and you can see the result that I've got with it. Your colourless blender can also be used if you do get a slight bleed over the line where you don't want it. If you use your colourless blender and work back towards where the colour should be, it kind of pushes that pigment back to where you want it to be, and it just lightens it up and diffuses the look of it where it went over the line. So I'll do a little bit of that over on this side where I haven't done any dotting so far, and then you can see just what the results of that look like. You can do very, very fine dots where you're just barely touching the tip to the paper, or you can just do little tiny circles where you hold it onto the paper for a longer period of time, and then you will get a lighter, more obvious dot out of that. So I'll just lift that one up to the camera to show you. So can you see there down the bottom where the light dots are? That's where the colourless colourless blender has worked back into the dry alcohol marker. And then that's how it looks at the top there, where I had bled over the line a little bit and I've used the alcohol marker. That isn't quite, sorry, the colourless blender hasn't quite dried there. And that's that side there where I didn't do any dotting with the pen, but you can see how the colourless blender has worked. Now you can also see in this section here, where it has bled over the lines. Now that doesn't really matter because I can do one of two things with that. The first thing I can do is work back over that with a darker colour and it's not going to matter, or a metallic gel pen or a gel pen of any description. Or I could use like a white acrylic paint pen, which could be like a Posca pen, or this is another Montmartre brand one that I have here. You have to shake it and it has a fine nib, which isn't really that fine, and a bullet tip nib. So you could use a white gel pen, whatever brand or whatever type you like, you know, go with that. And then all I would do is just use that to reinstate where I want the white. Now, I probably don't want it white there, so it doesn't matter, but I just thought I would show you for that purpose. Something else that you can do with your white gel pen or paint pen or whatever you decide is you can use it to put, you know, the white dots for a little bit of interest over the top of your alcohol marker. You can also use a white pencil. This is a very tiny white Prismacolor that I have, and I'll just use a little tiny light motion to bring a bit of a highlight back into there. And that's what you can do to, you know, reinstate a little bit of a light area. You can use any coloured pencil, you know, to come back and put some detail into your alcohol marker if that's what you want. And same with a metallic or any sort of gel pen, sparkle gel pen, anything like that. And then you can always go back over the top of that. So I'm going to use a slightly lighter warm grey here. And if I work back over the top of that, it's still going to be a highlight, but it's not going to be a bright white. I've knocked it back a little bit. It is diluting the acrylic a little bit there, so just be aware of that. That could happen, depending how often you work over the top of it, for how long. But that gives a nice effect as well, so you can, you know, play around with it, but just be aware that if you do that over acrylic paint, you could damage the nib of your alcohol marker. So just be aware of that. Okay, so that's just a few ideas of how you can actually use your alcohol markers in different ways. I will carry on and colour this page, and I will film some of it as I go. I won't do the whole lot because I think that might become a bit monotonous. But we'll see how that progresses, and I'll do little bits of video as I go along. Okay, I hope that has been helpful. You may not have thought of using your alcohol markers in that way before, and I know some people find them tricky and are really uncomfortable with them, but I would say keep going, because you know, as you become more familiar and comfortable with them, you'll start experimenting more and finding ways that you just think, okay, that works for me. It might not be how it works for everybody, but it might be something that you feel you get the result or the look that you want in a way that you feel comfortable working. Okay, that's it for that section. I'll be back with you soon. So now I'm going to show you a little bit of how I would do greenery or foliage. Now this Ohuhu marker set I have is 200 colours, And you would think that 200 colours would be plenty, but it is a bit limited when it comes to the greens. So I'm working with chartreuse green, bronze green and deep olive green here. So to start with, I'm going to just put some lighter green at the top of the tree, and then work down into sort of the mid green, and then the darker green. And then what I do is use that lightest green, and then I use that over the whole three colours just to blend it. That seems to work for me. So just leaving it quite rough to start with. You can always come back in later. Once it's dry, you have a look at whether you like it, and just keep working over it until you're happy. But I never work in a sort of really big area if I can help it at a time, because even with the alcohol markers I find that I do get some streaking or lines when I'm working in a bigger sky or sea or something like that. Now, if this was real life, obviously the trees as they go off into the distance seem to fade out. So they don't get lighter or darker, it's just a less saturated look at that colour, or less vibrant colour. So I'm going to go with the mid colour there for those, and I'm not going to worry about putting any lights in there. Now once again, I'm not trying to create a piece of realistic art here. I'm really just wanting to do an illustrative or illustration style picture at the end. Something I have noticed with some markers, and it doesn't work with all of them, is that if you're using a darker colour and you use a light colour and come back over it, sometimes that lighter colour dissolves the darker first colour. You might be able to see that there. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. So it's just a case of experimenting and playing around with what you have, because the different brands do react differently, and even just the different colours in one brand can interact differently sometimes. But I think that's why coming back over it with that lighter colour helps, because it does take some of the intensity out of the dark colour and just blend it all together. And I really like that. And we'll go for that mid one here. Okay, now sometimes I get the wrong lids on. Try not to do that. Now with that as well, you can always come back in with the colourless blender and do some little dots and dashes just to suggest that there's some lighter bits of foliage. And it's not going to be really bright and obvious. It can be really subtle, but it's just enough sometimes. A lot of the time you just need that suggestion, and with the change in the colours, to tell your brain that, oh, that's different foliage, or oh, there must be a few bits sticking out there that the light is catching. It doesn't have to be like a photograph. Your brain will still fill in that story for you when it looks at the picture. And that's really all I'm sort of aiming for sometimes. Now, oops, that's one of those trees there, which I have just missed. So I'm going to put some lighter stuff, more lighter stuff in that one because it's right at the front. And don't forget that if you were standing looking at this scene, you would not be seeing little tiny details in all of these trees that are a long way away from you. You might see them in these ones that are up closer to you, but you're not going to see them in these ones that are a long way away. Something else with the alcohol markers is don't be afraid to leave some white space either. You know, that can just sort of give it that little bit of interest without being too distracting. And I'm thinking that, is this grass all the way up here or a path? I'm not 100% sure how to do that one just yet. So I might use the darker colour just to go behind the row of trees here. And I'm just going to block colour that for now. Not everything has to be a finely graduated blend. If you decide that you're going to make a focal point in your picture, that's where you'd put all your tricky, really good detailed stuff and, you know, try your hardest with your blends and doing all that sort of thing. And then the background doesn't need all that. Because if you did that through the whole picture, you're detracting from the subject of the picture. Now, once again, Mr. Fogarty and Snail are the main interest in the picture, and then perhaps the Taj Mahal. But all of these individual things that are around the picture are not the focus of the picture, so therefore they don't have to be, you know, finely tuned, highly polished pieces of colouring. But if you do achieve that on here, automatically your eye is going to go to that, and then it will travel around the picture, and that's what you want to happen with the subject of the picture. You want to get that attention in, and then you think, oh, now what else is going on? And your eye will travel around. And you use your other little tips and tricks to achieve that. Okay, so that's that. Mr. Fogarty in this one, I think we'll give him, should we give him a nice bright coloured jacket in this one? I think I might go for, I don't think I've given him a yellow jacket yet. So I think I might give him, this one is called Melon Yellow. Yes, it's like, almost like a gold. What I try to do with my alcohol markers is I try to achieve as much as I can with the alcohol marker. And if I can get away with it, I would love to just have the picture to be all alcohol marker and nothing else. I only plan to have the coloured pencil and, you know, the white acrylic paint pen and all those things are only coming in as finishing touches at the end when I really have to use them. If I can get away with just using the alcohol marker like this, that's what I'd prefer. That's my goal. So I'm going to put some colourless blender in here and try to reinstate some highlights. The lapel would be lighter. And possibly the edges of the pocket might be worn and a bit lighter. Now I'm going to come back into the areas where I feel like it might be shadowed, and I'm going to put a bit of extra same colour melon yellow into there. Now, if that isn't dark enough, there is a dark yellow, which once again I've used these enough now that I know what my favourite go-to colours are. I have actually swatched these ones, but I very rarely look at the swatch, to be honest. I always have a bit of blotting paper, several sheets of blotting paper underneath, and I can just test bits on there. So that dark yellow has really made quite a vibrant shadow there. So we'll just let that dry a little bit. And this is drying nicely with the alcohol, colourless alcohol blender here has worked quite well, but I'll put a bit extra on these areas. And this colour is called Taffy. I'm going to give him some sort of brown and kind of mustardy stripes. For his pants. Now this set, what I really do like about them is that they have a lot of neutral earthy or skin colours, which are very useful. And one that I like is Shell White and Putty. This one is Shell White. And these sort of very neutral colours are great to do sort of decent areas in this sort of bland colour, so that you can get something to really pop in another area and make that really interesting. I might actually give him a fairly plain hat to start with. If I wanted that to be suggest a texture, then I wouldn't go for a completely blended look even on that first layer. I'd just leave it rough like that, let it dry. Use the colourless blender to just come and do a bit more. And this one is the Putty. And that's just a little bit deeper, and that's going to suggest a bit of shape to his hat there. Okay, so that's a little look at how I would attempt some clothing and some foliage on the trees. And that's how that's coming along. Now that still has a bit more drying to do. So those highlights might come up a bit brighter yet. We'll see, you know, as time goes on. but the rest of it will also dry a little bit lighter as well. So that's how that looks. That's how the trees are looking. And that's how the stone or concrete is looking. Okay, so I will just have a little break from that again. Now, I forgot to mention at the beginning that Mr. Fogarty's face and his little bit of body showing here was actually done in Faber-Castell Connector pen, because I'd gone through and started a few pages using those few green pens that I had in my hand. So he isn't actually alcohol marker, he is water-based marker there. You can mix them up and use them sort of together and as well, so it doesn't really matter. Now I thought I'll jump over to the water next, because that's something a little bit different again to show you. I have a colour that I like to use for water called Porcelain Blue. I think this is the one that I like. I'll just give it a quick, yep. It's got a real greeny tinge to it, and I'm thinking that pond water quite often looks like it has that green tinge to it because it has a lot of plant life in it. So I'm going to start at this end, and because it isn't a huge area, I'm just going to work, you know, in this sort of back and forward scribble circular type motion, because I can work fairly quickly. Now this marker is not that juicy, it is one of my favourite ones, and so you can see that it is starting to run a little bit dry. So what I'll do when that happens is I'll jump over to the chisel tip and see whether that's any juicier, and then I'll just have to be a little bit more careful around all this detail with the chisel tip. So I'll just use the fine tip in there. The lily pads are going to be green, so it doesn't really matter if any of that bleeds in there, because I'll be using a green on there. And if all else fails, if there's something I really hate, I know that I can always come in with pencil, coloured pencil at the end, and adjust it. Adjust it or camouflage it. And you know, if all else fails, there's always acrylic paint. But I don't really tend to resort to acrylic paint very often at all. That's partly because if it got to that stage where I really disliked it so badly, I would just abandon it. I've got quite a few books, you know, thousands of pages to colour, so I'm not going to get too hung up on something that goes really terribly wrong. I prefer it doesn't happen, but you know, I'm not going to sort of lose too much time trying to fix it up. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this paper, it feels to me like, you know, photocopying paper that you would put in your printer or photocopier, but not the cheapest of cheap. It has that sort of smooth finish to it that the markers just seem to sort of float over. It's not rough, it's not chewing up the nibs. And the colour is sort of soaking in, but not like those sort of horrible papers that are like newspaper where it just soaks it all up and the colour disappears straight away. That can be really frustrating when you're working with alcohol markers. So a lot of the results when it comes to alcohol markers comes back to paper, just like it does with any of your mediums. I think paper is, you know, probably the most important thing, because each medium has its particular needs when it comes to having the correct paper to get the best results out of it. So I've got quite a smooth result there just from doing that sort of colouring. And I'll use the colourless blender again just to very lightly suggest that there's some, you know, ripples in the water. Obviously it's a pond, there's not going to be great whopping waves in there, but there will be little bits of light reflected. If you're really clever, you could try and have some of the colours from the Taj Mahal reflector back into the water as well, but that's down the track. So for starters, that is going to be enough, I think, because I need to see how that dries before I progress and make any other decisions. What I will do though is down this end, there would be more likely to be some darker variations in the water, perhaps, indicating that there's something, pardon me, under the water. Or there could be a slight shadow being cast by the water lilies and lily pads and so on. So I've just used a slightly darker, deeper sort of blue. That one's called Turquoise Green Light. And now I'm using the lighter porcelain blue to come back and blend that back in. And as similar with the water-based markers, it's a bit of to and fro, you know, coming back and forward and reinstating things or taking away things as you go, as the picture progresses and you decide, you know, oh, okay, I want to highlight that, no, I want to downplay that. Now you can use dots to blend the colour in water or sea, you know, if you want to blend a darker colour in. However, this being a nice smooth pond, I don't think that's going to be quite as effective. But, you know, you could sort of bring in a little bit of that to blend the two colours so that you don't have a solid area of either colour, but they're blending and visually creating a new colour. So that would be how I would approach that. Now, as his hat is drying, I definitely want a little bit of extra deepness of colour at the edges there. And I'm going to match his hat band to his coat. Okay, so he's starting to come along. I'm going to actually use a green grey to start putting in the edges of the pond here and the stones at the edge. And that just has that little bit of greenness to the grey, which will match in nicely with what I've chosen to do with the water there. And for the variation, I've got a slightly darker shade here of the same green grey. So these stones that are, you know, slightly different, well, it's the way that RJ has drawn them. We'll put some different colour in there to just change that, because, you know, real life we wouldn't see concrete or pavers or bricks that are all exactly the same consistent colour all the way along. So we're going to suggest that in our picture here as well. So a few dots. Okay, so I think that's a good start for showing you some different techniques with alcohol markers. And that's got a really harsh line, so I'm just going to come back and blend that in a little bit. So I think what I'll do now is I'll colour a little bit more off camera, and then I will come back to you and show you how I'm going and how I will finish it up. Okay, so I'm back to finish off this page. I've got to this point now, and quite happy with the way that it's coming along. I decided that I needed to Google the Taj Mahal to get some colour ideas, and I saw a photo of some really strong lighting that looked like it was probably sunrise or sunset. So it was really strongly lit on one side with very yellow light. So I decided to sort of try and mimic that sort of thing and give it a pink sky for something different, because it was looking very neutral with all the greys. And I brought a little bit of this colour into Mr. Snail's shell, just to, you know, make that look a little bit more cohesive. And this here has got a bit of a pink or peach tone to it as well, so that ties in as well. So now I'm thinking I'm just going to put a little bit of gold or some metallics onto some of these items. So I decided to use more of a coppery sort of orange metallic for down here. And I like to use the alcohol marker or a base first under the metallic pens, because quite often you get those little sections where the pen skips, and misses little bits, and if you've already coloured underneath it, you get that colour coming through rather than a stark white, and you can actually make that a bit of a feature too if you feel like you need that or would like that. So I'm quite happy with how this page has come along. I really had no idea again when I set out to start it, other than showing you how to do some stone or some different effects with the alcohol markers, and so I'm quite pleased at how that has ended up coming together. I'm going to use a little bit of silver for his belt buckle, and I'm going to do a gold clock. So I'm just using the Sakura Jelly Roll Metallic pens. I do rather like, just be careful I don't smudge that metallic pen everywhere. I do rather like the way these particular pens work, and there are some nice colours in there. I don't use a lot of them, just those little bits, and to be honest they don't photograph all that well, but you know, it just feels nice to use them and finish it off. Quite often I go through the book, you know, and I'm finding another page, and I might come across the page I've coloured and think, oh, okay, that's all faded and disappeared. But, you know, it's just the enjoyment at the time of doing it that matters really. And I might just put a few little specks there in his shell. And I think Mr. Fogarty has got everything done on him now. I think because I've forgotten to do this with the other colour, I'll just do a little bit of gold on there. Okay, so I think that's looking very much like finished to me. So what I will do is I'll just lift that up to the camera for you and point a few areas out. So Mr. Fogarty's jacket ended up drying really nicely. That is just all the alcohol marker. I haven't put any pencil on there. I did use a little bit of white Prismacolor pencil there to suggest a slight reflection from the building into the water. You can see on Mr. Snail I've done the dotting technique to do a bit of texture on his skin. And that's how the stone ended up drying. And I decided to keep all this area very basic, because although it's really pretty, if I make a big deal of this, it's going to detract from this centre part, which is really what's most important. You know, Mr. Fogarty through to Taj Mahal, and I have used a lot of the colours in the Taj Mahal that are in Mr. Fogarty himself, so it implies that there's a relationship between those things. As is Mr. Snail's shell, he's got all the similar colours in. All the greens are the same as the greens in the background. I brought some more of that into Mr. Fogarty's face over the top of the water-based marker. What else have I done? Brought all of these colours down into here, into the base. So I think that's about it. And the water, I did end up coming back into the water with a little bit more of the turquoise colour, so that just lifted that watercolour a little bit. And I haven't done any more here. That is just purely the Colourless Blender, which has come back in afterwards and taken a bit of the colour back off. That just shows you how you do get those hard edges sometimes from using a colourless blender. Again, just a few dots here and there to imply shadows. Just break up the colour really. You know, if you have an area that has just one colour, it can look very flat. And just by bringing in a couple of different colours, you know, from around the picture into an area, like down here, there's some pinks and peach and the putty, some grey. It just lifts that area a little bit and ties it in with the rest of the page. So there you go, that's that page complete, I think. I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. I haven't really done any dark shadows in there, but I don't feel I need to. I think with that rosy pink sky, you know, the peachy pink sky and everything, it implies that, you know, it's a bit of a softer look, that I don't really want to put the harsh dark shadows in there with it. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. Once again, I hope that it gives you a few little tips and ideas. I'm not attempting to tell you that this is the way you should do it, or it's the only way that you should do it, but to show you some ways that I work so that you might get the confidence and the ideas yourself to try something different and find something that I haven't even thought of doing yet, and just, you know, really enjoy playing. And it doesn't matter whether it's the water-based marker, alcohol marker, coloured pencil or paint, whatever. Just have fun with it and see what you can achieve. So I shall say goodbye for now. Thank you for watching again. I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you have any comments, pop them below and I will get back to you. I really appreciate people taking the time to watch and comment. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.